All right, this week's Torah portion is a double one, Bahar B'chukotai, and it finishes the book of Leviticus. And it also, this Shabbat will be the last Shabbat in the month of Iyar. This Shabbat, we bless the month of Sivan. Sivan. Now, Sivan is the month when the Torah was given. Right? The Torah was given 50 days after the Jews left Egypt. So the Jews left Egypt in the middle of the month of Nisan. And then 15 days later started the month of Iyar. So that means 15 and another 30, that's 45. And after 5 days, the Torah was given, that's 50 days. So that's when the Torah was given. In Yanush Rosh Chodesh Sivan, the whole topic of the first day of Sivan. Sivan is the third month of the Jewish year, right? The first month is Nisan. That's the first of the months. That Shemavorech, that we bless, Shabbat Kodesh, Mevorechim HaChodesh. This is on this holy Shabbat, this coming Shabbat, we bless the month of Sivan. It's the last Shabbat in the month of Iyar. So this month is stated clearly in the Torah. Meforish B'Kra says clearly in the Torah. B'Chodesh HaShlishi, in the third month. B'Yom Hazeh, on this day. Which day? It says B'Chodesh HaShlishi. What's the Chodesh HaShlishi? That's the month of Sivan. B'Yom Hazeh, on this day in the third month, the month of Sivan. On this day, what is it? It says Rosh Chodesh. Anytime it says B'Yom Hazeh, it means the first day of the month. Bo Midbar Sinai, the Jewish people went into the desert of Sinai to receive the Torah. They were just 45 days out of Egypt. Fresh-born babies. Right, 1 month old, 1.5 month old babies. That's what the Jewish people, the whole Jewish nation was. They came to Mount Sinai. All right, just one small thing. And one point is that we discussed in the last, the Maimon we just finished learning, that God creates the world all the time. The world is very complicated. On one end, it's very simple. It's just one big creation. The whole thing is a big creation. Like if you look at some sort of a painting that has a bunch of details in it, or let's say you look at a map of some city, of New York. So the whole thing is one big map. It's a map of New York. It's one big thing. But if you get into the details, then you realize that it's not so simple. And then that's only on the map. But if you go to the actual place, you see that everything is very even more complicated. And that's what God creates. But there's something else also. As soon as God gave the Torah, so he revealed something. The Torah was there before the world. The world it's the blueprint of the world. So he revealed something else, namely that there's a purpose in everything in the world. Everything in the world is telling a story, and it has a message to us about how to serve God better, how to be better people. So from everything we can learn something positive. So it says when did that start? When God gave the Torah. So also here, how much more so we can learn from time. Every moment in time is different from every other moment. And every moment has its message. So it says the message was the third month. And that was when the Jews went into this place called the desert of Sinai in order to receive the Torah. Midbar Sinai, this called the Sinai desert. This is connected to the giving of the Torah. I know I repeated this hundreds of times, who knows how many. But this is the uniqueness of the Jewish people. You understand? We're the only religion that even claims such a thing. And we believe it's true. At least there's always been, hundreds of thousands of Jews that really actually believe this. That God, the creator of the universe, really took the Jews out of Egypt, spoke to Moses. He led them all out of Egypt. There were plagues on the Egyptians, and God provided for them food in the desert and water, miraculous. and killed all their enemies, etc. And there were clouds of glory around them. And God then took them to split the sea and took them to the mountain, Mount Sinai. And he gave them the Torah. And this was like minimum. There were 3 million people that saw it. In front of 3 million people. So the God himself saw, the Jewish people themselves saw God himself. What this means, I have no idea. It says their souls jumped out of their bodies. They saw and they heard. There's nobody even made up a story. I don't even think there's any science fiction books that made up a thing like this. And if it did, for sure, nobody would believe it. And here the Jewish people have been suffering, and there's all these weird religions that try to take it away from them and claim it's not so, and God changed his mind, and the Jewish people lose the Torah, and the Jews don't understand how to translate the Torah, they don't understand how to this. And so there's all these enemies throughout the generations, most of them Jews, that try to destroy the Torah. And nevertheless, somehow or other, the Jews have always held on to this bizarre, crazy story that nobody else has. And they even give their lives for it. And we're not talking about a bunch of like freaks or something like that. We're talking about people that sit and learn, intelligent, genius people. Just take a look at the Lubavitcher Rebbe, like these other tzaddikim I talked about, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. These people, they were tremendously intelligent and very normal human beings from everywhere, and they actually believed this. And not only did they believe it, they changed their whole lives accordingly. And not only them, but hundreds of thousands of Jews do. I don't think it's the majority of the Jews. I don't know how, but it is, but certainly an impressive number. And we just learned in the previous moment that every Jew really down deep believes this, because it's the truth. We're talking about this is the Creator who's creating us. Okay, so this idea of that they came to Midbar Sinai, this was sort of like the birth of the Jewish nation. They got out of Egypt in order to receive the Torah. And what is the Torah? The Torah teaches you how to serve the creation, how to return back energy to the Creator. And this is connected to going into the desert of Sinai. This is connected to the giving of the Torah. Sinai, why is the desert is called Sinai and the mountain is called Sinai? Like it says, Moshe Kibel Torah mi Sinai. This is how the Pirkei Avot starts off. Moses received the Torah from Sinai. That Sinai is connected to the Torah. Why is it Midbar, the desert of Sinai? Kadrashas Chazal, like the rabbis say, Nitma b'Midbar, that the Torah was given in a desert, Makom Hefker, in a place which is ownerless. No one can claim land in the desert. No one wants to. Kol Rotza Lekabel, anyone who wants to receive the Torah can come and receive from the Torah. Non-Jews have what's called 7 Noahide commandments. And therefore, Kishabo Midbar Sinai, when the Jewish people came to this Midbar Sinai, Barosh Chodesh Sivan, on the first day of Sivan, Hamakom Aroy, the place which was fitting to give the Torah, Hitchila Inyan Matan Torah. When they came into this desert, that already began actually, right, the giving of the Torah. Like you go to hear a speaker speak, as soon as you go into the auditorium, you're already there. That already began the speech. Right? You took your seat and everything like that. Everything's quiet. He's just waiting for everyone to be there. Same thing. The Jews, they got into the auditorium. They went into the desert of Sinai. Miyad, immediately after Rosh Chodesh, Moshe began, immediately after the first day of Sivan, when they went into the desert, Moses began to work with them as far as receiving the Torah. Like it says, Omar Kodesh Baruch Hu, God said, Hariyasha she'atein lehem, here is the time, has come the time that I will give them the Torah. Right? They've been walking around in the desert 45 days, and here it is, Torah time. Inyan Zeh, this, Mudgash Ba'akriya, the Torah, this is also the reading of the Torah, the portion of the Torah that we read right next to the giving of the Torah. What is it? Like it says, Shala'olam, we always read Parshat Bamidbar Sinai, Kodem Atzeret. the rabbi set when we read what. In this case, it's Ezra the Sofer. You'll see Ezra the Sofer, he came with the Jews, or he arrived shortly after. The Jews came in the second temple, to build the second temple. He came in the beginning. He was one of the men of the great assembly. And he established that all the time the reading of the Torah portion that will be read right before, directly before the holiday of Shavuot, when we receive the Torah, will be Bamidbar, next week's Torah portion. Next week's Torah portion is called Bamidbar Sinai. That's what it's called. The whole book. In English, it's called Numbers. Also in Hebrew, some call it Chumash Pekudei, because God numbers the Jews. He counts the Jews right in this first thing. So that's called Numbers. But the first word, if you look at any bookstore, the name of this fourth book of the Torah is called Bamidbar. Right? Genesis, Exodus, what is Leviticus, and then there's Bamidbar. The one that everybody calls Numbers is called Bamidbar, because of the first two words, the first two significant words in the Torah portion. Next week's Torah portion, not this week. This week we're in Bahar Bechukotai. That ends the book of Vayikra. And next week we start off Bamidbar in order that we should read it before the holiday of Shavuot. When, by the way, when is the holiday of Shavuot? I will tell you in one moment. I will tell you the holiday of Shavuot, when it is. Yeah. It is on Monday, Sunday night. Sunday night, not next Sunday night. It's in like 2 weeks, Sunday night. Midbar Sinai before, you always read Midbar Sinai before the holiday of Shavuot. Atzeret is the holiday of Shavuot. The Techila B'Zen, they begin in Mincha of Shabbos, of this Shabbos. This Shabbat, at Mincha time, we read what's going to be read next week, which is Bamidbar. So Midbar Sinai, that the Jewish people reached on the first day of Sivan, Who on Makom, this is the place that is fitting for the giving of the Torah. Okay, again, why are we talking about all this? This Torah portion is called Bahar. Bahar is talking about Bahar Sinai, the mountain of Sinai. That's the name of this Torah portion. And this Shabbat is the Shabbat that blesses the month of Sivan. The month of Sivan is the month when the Jewish people went into the desert of Sinai to receive the Torah. So now we're talking about the desert, and we're talking about the giving of the Torah, and we're talking about also not this week's Torah portion, but next week's portion also has a direct connection to the desert of Sinai. That's the name of the Torah portion. It's called Bamidbar. This is the place where it's fitting for the Torah. So God decided he wanted to give the Torah in a desert. And we always read right before the Torah is given also two Torah portions that hint at the desert. This week, Bahar is talking about the mountain, Mount Sinai, which was given in the desert. And also next week, it's even clearer. We read Parshat Bamidbar, which is talking about the desert. Let's explain now, what is this thing of the desert of Sinai? Midbar, like a desert. The Matan Torah, connect the Matan Torah. Now, if you think about this 1 minute, I mean, God is the master of the world, right? So God could have given the Torah in Egypt. He decimated all of Egypt. He decimated them all. The Jewish people, they crossed over the Yam Suf, the Red Sea, you want to call it the Reed Sea, whatever. And they crossed, according to the Midrash, they didn't really even cross over. They just came on the same side. And God drowned all the Egyptians. So the Jews could have said, hey, look at this. God took us through the thing, and we're on the same side. This is a sign that we should go back to Egypt. I mean, God killed them all. Let's go back to Egypt and receive the Torah over there. Or even more, God could have just, skipped the 10 plagues. Just one morning, all the Egyptians just come into their mind the same thing. We're getting out of here. We're moving to, Chicago or something. I don't know. We're getting out. Just all the Egyptians just leave. It could have just come into their mind one day and say, we're leaving. We treated the Jews unfairly, right? That's what's going to be in the days of the Moshiach. Right? All the nations will say, hey, the Jews are God's chosen people. We treated them unfairly. Right? Let's listen to what they have to say. Why couldn't have done it to the Egyptians and given the Torah in Egypt? That would have been nice. And then they could have been peaceful and quiet. And then little by little, they could have made plans. And then they could have gone to the land of Israel or made the boundaries of Egypt bigger and bigger. I mean, it's right next to it, right? Egypt is right there. And just go a little bit north. Why didn't God do it that way? Right? Because he loved the action. No, the reason is because God wanted to give the Torah in the desert, and he wanted the Jews to leave Egypt. He didn't want the Jews to be bosses. God does not want a nation of leaders. He wants a nation of followers that follow him. They're his servants. One of the things that God wants is sometimes that we have to be leaders, or we're supposed to be the teachers of all mankind. But the main aspect of the Jewish people is that they are servants. That's why they were in Egypt for so long. They learned to be servants of Paro, and now you're going to be my servants. God wanted them to leave Egypt and go, and now you're my servants. God says, okay, I'm going to take you into the desert. A desert is a place that's ownerless. You want to set up a place in the desert, it's yours. No, it doesn't belong to anybody. Nobody owns it. Lo balut shel yachid, not any one person can claim it. V'lo balut shel rabim, and not of many people. Kamo reshut rabim, reshut sheyeh bebalut rabim. That's ideally what a desert is. Now there's no such thing. You can't even the Arabian desert, because the person takes over the Arabian desert. But an individual person, right? He took it up. They'll think he's got some sort of plans. He probably wants to do something bad. He's probably going to, but generally speaking, deserts, nobody wants to live there. You want to live there? You're such a crazy person. You want to live in the desert? Live in the desert. It's ownerless. Because nobody owns the desert, anyone that wants to can go and stake a claim. Anybody who wants to can receive it. Nowadays they have oil, they dig for oil, things like that. Okay, but genuine speaking, a desert is basically a useless place that nobody wants it, and if you want it, take it. At first glance, the Torah is such an important thing. The Torah is the will and the wisdom of the creator of the universe. It's the blueprint of the universe. There's nothing like the Torah. Despite what other people say, the other religions and the professors and things like that, the fact of the matter is the Torah is absolute truth, and nothing else is absolute truth. There's no such thing as absolute truth in the world. The only absolute truth is the Torah. That's all there is. The Torah. Everything else is relative and it changes day to day. The Torah is eternal. Giving the Torah to the Jewish people is not the way that God wants to. God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. It's not that God wanted to remove his kingship from the Torah. What do you mean? He gave the Torah in the desert means that it's not God's Torah anymore. Hefker, no ownerless, means that nobody owns it, not even God. God doesn't own it. The Hifkir l'kol. God didn't say the Torah, okay, I'm giving the Torah in the desert. Anyone who wants to come can take it. It's not mine anymore. That's what it means. It's ownerless, right? He gave it in the desert. The Torah he gave in the desert, right? Hainu shenasid kedavar she'en alav balot. That God gave the Torah in the desert to show that nobody owns it. You want to take it. Anybody wants to can buy. All you have to do is just grab onto it or something. God did not throw the Torah away in the desert. He gave us the Torah. Not only that, he gave us his Torah. He gave it in the desert, but it still remains his. Hainu Torah balutam shall call Bnei Israel. Not only that the Torah becomes property now of all of the Jewish people, that they don't have to do anything. Call echad ve'echad Israel, each and every Jew, from the biggest until the smallest, until a child is just born now, automatically the Torah becomes his. It's not that it's ownerless. If something is ownerless, you have to do something in order to own it. The Torah automatically belongs to the Jews, and it also belongs to God. So if God says, okay, you know what, I'll throw it in the desert, anybody who wants, it's my Torah, but anybody who wants it, you can take it. It's still, I'll let you do whatever you want to with it. which that's basically true. That's basically true. A person can take the Torah and do whatever he wants to with it. Right? You can misuse it and twist it. But on the other hand, the Torah, it automatically belongs to every Jew, automatically. Because every Jew is part of what's called the congregation of Jacob. Harihu Yoresh Hakol. So if so, the Jewish people, they receive everything. All the Torah, Kula, like it says, Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. The Torah was given to us by means of Moshe, Morasha Kilat Yaakov. It said is the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. If so, we have to understand, if God wants to give us the Torah, we'll have joint ownership. We have to understand, why is it the Torah that was given to all the Jewish people on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, right? It becomes their Torah. Etein lemet Torati. God said, I will give my Torah to them. So if so, it just went from, so to speak, single ownership to joint ownership. But the whole thing is ownership. What's this got to do with a desert? A desert is a place where there is no such thing as ownership. Right? You stake your claim in the desert. This is my land. It becomes yours because nobody else wants it. If somebody else comes along and evicts you from it, he says, I want you to leave the land. You can know it's mine. Like the desert, nobody owns anything in the desert. So why did God give the Torah to the Jewish people in the desert? He wanted them to own it. Why stress this thing of the desert? If you want to say a side thing, he gave it to Bereshut Rabin. Kamosha Torah, like the Torah was given, the Balotein, the Torah was given over to the Jewish people. So what are we saying over here? That somehow or other the desert is a very essential thing. It's a very essential thing. It's not like, the president or professor or something like that. He lives on a street. It doesn't make any difference what street he lives on. The main thing is the person himself. Here it says the Torah. The main thing is the Torah. The Torah is godly. It's pure. God gave it to the Jews. This is very good. Why is it so important that it was given in the desert, where it was given? And not only that, the desert seems to be implying exactly the opposite message. That the desert is a place where you throw things away. And nobody owns it. On the other hand, we also have to understand the reason why it's called Bamidbar, the Chodesh HaShlishi, the third month. On this day, they came into the desert. This is expressed in the Parshat Bamidbar. This idea that they came into the desert, this is really in next week's Torah portion. That we read it right next to Shavuot, and not in the Parsha, which is which is the Torah portion when they actually came into the desert. This section of the Torah, this is right next to the first day of Sivan. Then they came into the desert. That's where the desert is really stressed. Parshat Bahar B'chukotai. Like in many, many years, like in this year, right? That when Parshat B'chukotai, that they're joined. Okay, let's explain this a little bit. We don't have much time, but let's do what we can. When we read the Parsha Bamidbar comes before the holiday of Shavuot, it's not just because it's connected to the Midbar Sinai and Matan Torah, but also because Ezra HaSofer, like I said, he fixed up that the Jewish people, that they should read the curses which are written in the Torah. Now, in this Torah Kahanim, that's the book of Leviticus. In the book of Leviticus, the last portion is Bachukotai. That's what we're going to read this coming Shabbat. It has in it 49 curses. 49 terrible curses that await the Jews if they don't, if they reject what God wants. 49 curses. It says, in order that these 49 curses should not come immediately before the giving of the Torah, because what's it going to say? Who needs the Torah? Well, it's just say all these curses. What do we do to deserve these curses? Oh, you went against the Torah. Oh, I don't want the Torah. Don't do me a favor. Don't give me the Torah. So in order to separate between these curses and the Torah, so therefore, Zeshem Mosif and the Korban Midbar. That's why they read that the Torah portion of next week is Bamidbar. It's always read before the holiday of Shavuot, the giving of the Torah, in order that shouldn't come the curses in Bechukotai right next to the giving of the Torah. So at the end of this week, we have all these curses, and God didn't want that after these curses, there should be the holiday of celebrating the giving of the Torah. So therefore, Ezra came and he said, we'll make a separation. We'll always make it that the reading of the Torah that's right before the holiday of Shavuot will always be Bamidbar. So here's a totally different reason, not because everything is hefker, in order to keep curses away from us. The main, what we read before Atzerot, should really be B'chukotai. Really, we should be reading these curses right before. A lot of years, B'har B'chukotai. The reason, namely, but because God did not want to have the curses which are in B'chukotai right next to Shavuot, in other words, there is a bad element, if you want to call it a negative element. Oh, not bad, a negative element in B'chukotai. It should be right after Chukotai, we should be celebrating the holiday of Shavuot. But Ezra didn't want that there should be the curses right before the holiday. So therefore, he stuck Bamidbar Sinai in there. What's the connection of Bahar B'chukotai, the Matan Torah? The name of the parsha, Bahar. The name of this week's Torah portion is called Bahar. Hahar, the mountain that was given the Torah. And B'chukotai, this is the language of being carved out. This refers to the letters which were carved out on the tablets. This includes the whole entire Torah. What the letters that were carved out on the Torah, this is the written Torah and the oral Torah, the explanation. Right? The Torah without explanation is meaningless. Even the 10 Commandments are meaningless. Afilu even says, Masha Talmid Vatek Atid L'Chadesh. It says in the 10 Commandments are already contained what a good pupil is going to, how do you say, invent new ideas, new understandings. And B'tochan a parsha, this is the beginning, Vayedaber Hashem al Moshe Bahar Sinai Lemor V'Shav Sor Shabbat L'Hashem. What is the first commandment in this week's Torah portion? The commandment of Shemitah, like we just learned in the Maimer in the morning, the 7th year. Mayan Shemitah, it's Har Sinai. What's the connection between the 7th year that you don't do any work to Mount Sinai? Hello, Kol mitzvahs, all the mitzvahs are said on Mount Sinai, right? How does the Torah portion said that God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai and he said, 6 years you should work and 7 years you should rest. And that's it. That's all he said. That's what it seems to be from this week's portion. Ella, just like Shemitah was said, all the details and all the sub-details were said on Mount Sinai. Also, everything was said with all of its details on Mount Sinai. So these are the commandments which God commanded Moses on Mount Sinai. Oh, so if so, let's just do this last one. Tzorech Lav, we have to understand, why is this portion read on the Torah portion of Bahar Sinai is read on the Shabbat that we bless the month of Sivan, when the Jewish people came into the desert of Sinai. And it's not mentioned, that's the main thing of the desert, right? And it doesn't say anything about the desert, like in the Parshat Bamidbar that we read before, but Bahar Sinai. Okay, so what's he saying? This seems to be sort of like a little bit opposite. The Torah portion that we read right before the giving of the Torah on Sinai is called Bamidbar. It's called Bamidbar. The desert of Sinai. So that hints at the desert of Sinai. But the Torah portion that we read right before we went into the desert of Sinai is called Bahar, is called the mountain of Sinai. It should be the other way around. It should be that we read the portion right before we went into the desert of Sinai. It should be called the desert. And the portion that we read right before we go receive the Torah on the mountain should be called the mountain, but it's not. We read this week a portion which is called the mountain, and next week we read a portion which is called the desert, which is the opposite way that they occurred. So why did God do this? What's the message that he wants to give to us about being better people and being more in tune with the Torah and the meaning of the Torah and the purpose of the world? What message is God trying to send us here? The Shabbat right before the Jews went into the desert is called the mountain. And the Shabbat right before the Jews received the Torah on the mountain is called the desert. What's the message? This will be revealed tomorrow. Now let's just do the Yom Yom. Yom Yom. There is no one for whom to pride oneself. All right, I don't know the translation. Don't be too proud of your accomplishments. In other words, don't say, I've done enough, I think I've done enough. A person must work constantly. With patience and with friendliness, we can prevail in all things. It seems that it's difficult. What's our job? Our job is to convince, especially all the Jews, to walk in the way of the Torah and the commandments. Well, don't say, listen, I already, convinced 3,000 Jews to change their lives. That's pretty good, right? So forget about the pretty good part of it. Say I've already done 3,000, and now I only have another few million to go. How can I do everything? This is with patience and friendliness, and pleasantness, you can prevail, you can succeed in all things with God's help. With a superior attitude toward others, and by stressing how important we think we are, you can lose everything, God forbid. In other words, humility is the key to success. Humility and perseverance and happiness is the positiveness is the key to success. And there's a lot of work to be done. It has to be done pleasantly and quietly, but in a way of humility. Humility. And that'll make a nice, happy world with Moshiach now. Have a good day. 3:00, God willing, we'll continue with the Chumash of this week's Torah portion. Very interesting, double portion. Hope to see you at 3:00. God bless you all.